Hi, and welcome to Chapter 4. Today we're going to talk about options for organizing businesses. And this is one of the most important decisions that a business can make, and that's what form of ownership will they use. And you may start a business someday, and you'll be facing this important decision. Hopefully this will give you some background on that. Okay, so a vast majority of businesses go with these four types of ownership. Okay, the sole proprietorship, which is a single owner, a partnership, two or more people, a corporation, which is a separate legal entity, or a limited liability company, or an LLC, which is a hybrid between the various forms. As you can see by these pie charts, it's very interesting that when it comes to the impact, the economic impact, corporations far outdo proprietorships and partnerships. In fact, 83% of sales and 67% of net income are generated by corporations. However, sole proprietorships are 72% of the total. So that's fairly interesting, since corporations only account for 19% but generate 83% of the sales. The sole proprietorship is the most common, and in this form of ownership, there's one individual, and it's very easy to start a sole proprietorship. You could decide you want to open a store or an online business or an accounting practice or consulting, whatever. Okay, it's very easy. And you maintain control since you're the only one there. Okay, and the profits stay in your business. Some disadvantages: you have limited financial resources. Normally people get money from their savings or family. It's very difficult to get loans. And the major disadvantage with a proprietorship is the unlimited liability. The owner is responsible for all debts and liabilities of the business. They're personally liable. So someone could lose their house or their assets if it came down to that. And it's hard to attract a lot of talented employees because there's not a lot of room for advancement. These are small businesses. And there's a lack of permanence. If the owner retires or dies or something happens, the business just ceases to exist. A partnership is where two or more people get together and they pool their resources, so there are more resources to be had, and they share the responsibilities. It's very easy as well to form a partnership. There's no specific limit on number of partners, though most of the times there are two. There's unlimited liability here again, just like with a sole proprietorship. Partners are liable for the debts of the business. People have to really get along. You could have disagreements. It's difficult to get out of the agreement. And it's hard to for the business to continue. If something were to happen to one of the partners, the business would cease to exist. General partnerships are where two or more people enter into the agreement and they share the profit and loss. In a limited partnership, partners contribute financially, but one partner doesn't actively participate in management. They've just helped fund the operation. So their liability is limited to his or her contribution into the partnership. Okay, the next form of ownership is a corporation. Okay, and we said this is the one that generates the most sales dollar and the most net income. There are several types of corporations, and the most common is a C corporation. And for the most part, that's what, when you hear corporation, that's what they're talking about. Corporation is a legal entity, separate and distinct from owners, but they have all the rights and powers that people have, even though they're an entity. They can own and transfer property, enter into contracts. Corporations can sue other corporations and individuals. They can be sued. They're owned by stockholders, okay? And stockholders elect a board of directors. The board of directors establishes what the company's doing and kind of looks over things on behalf of stockholders. So some advantages. There's limited liability. The owners of a corporation aren't personally liable for the debts or whatever happens in the company. Okay. And there's permanence. If something happens to owners, the corporation goes on, so it's easy to transfer ownership. And they can raise capital much easier than a sole proprietorship or a partnership. The disadvantages is it's fairly expensive and complex to start a corporation. One big disadvantage is double taxation. The corporation itself is taxed, as well as the owners. Earnings that the owners received are also taxed. So corporations are typically owned by many individuals who are called stockholders, and they pay money for stock, hoping that the business increases in value. And if the business does, then the stockholders are paid dividends, or those are payments to shareholders. If a corporation is doing business in the same state that it was incorporated in, that's a domestic corporation. A foreign corporation does business outside the state that it was incorporated in. So if you incorporate in South Carolina and you do business in Georgia, that's a foreign corporation. An alien corporation is one that does business outside of the United States. So the board of directors is very important because the stockholders can't actively participate in the company. Some corporations have thousands and thousands of stockholders. So a board of directors is elected to oversee the operation of the corporation. Okay, they don't really get involved in the day-to-day business, but they are in charge of hiring the CEO and the president, and they monitor what's going on to make sure that the stockholders' interests are being handled. Okay, when we talk about businesses like to grow. One way they can grow is through increasing their product line or coming up with a new market strategy. But a lot of companies do mergers and acquisitions as a means for growth. So a merger is where two companies agree to come together. Okay, they combine. An acquisition is when one company buys another. Okay, and many companies, especially back in the 80s and 90s, were involved in mergers and acquisitions. And mergers and acquisitions can take three different forms. A horizontal merger is one that combines firms in the same industry. Okay, so like, for instance, United Airlines acquired Continental Air in 2010. They're in the same industry, so they're looking to just increase market share, increase size, and gain efficiency. A vertical merger or acquisition is one where a company buys or acquires another that they have things in common, like a buyer-seller relationship, and it makes them more efficient. Okay, and for instance, I worked for a company that was involved with nursing homes. And they had, well, at the time we had about 20,000 employees, and we were going around picking up little companies that were like pharmaceutical companies, rehab companies, home health companies, because that allowed us to align our vision vertically, in that we could use our own acquisition partners to perform the work that we had to do. Okay, so that's one example. A conglomerate is where businesses combine that have really nothing in common. Okay, and GE acquiring RCA would be an example of a conglomerate. A divestiture is the opposite of merger and acquisition. This is where a business is trying to become more efficient, and they're trying to get rid of parts of the organization that really don't fit into their strategic goals any longer. So that can be a spin-off where they set up a division or part of the division business as a separate company. And to do that, they sell stock to existing stockholders. A carve-out is a separate business, and the stock is sold to investors outside the original organization. This is an interesting acquisition and sell-off that happened back in the late 90s. Okay, Daimler, which is the German company for Mercedes-Benz, acquired Chrysler in 2007. Or no, in 1998. They had them till 2007. And they had this grand strategy. They were going to build this global empire for automobiles. And they paid, let me check this, $38 billion, okay, to acquire Chrysler. But what happened is they never thought to think that culture would not, the cultures would not be compatible. And it created all kinds of problems between the management team in Germany and the management team in Detroit, and it never really came together. Okay, and we talked in the last chapter how important culture is when you're doing business. So it's a major issue here, and it ended up with Daimler-Benz having to sell off Chrysler, and they sold it for less than half of what they paid for it. So it was quite a excuse me, quite a problem. Okay, then we have the limited liability company, and this is just a kind of a hybrid or combination of the corporation, partnership, and sole proprietorship. Okay, and then the book also talked about co-ops, you know, where excuse me, where individual organizations and small businesses kind of band together, okay, to form a larger organization and get some efficiencies or economies of scale. Franchising we talked a little bit about before. It's not really ownership, but an operation option. Okay, and I talked to you before about Build-A-Bear, because that one always cracks me up. So franchising is one way companies do that. And lots of advantages, less risk, they have brand recognition. Disadvantages, though, they're very costly. If you've ever looked into how much, and I think I have a slide on that, how much franchises cost. Okay, so some disadvantages. And here's, I don't know if you can, hopefully you can read this. For instance, McDonald's, if you want to buy a McDonald's franchise, you have to have $950,000 to invest. You figure almost $1 million. Okay, and you can see some of these others. So it could be very expensive, but they can also be, you know, very profitable, obviously. Well, those are the high points for the chapter, and I hope you found something worthwhile or interesting. Thanks.